Hey y'all, welcome to the realm of comics. This is where we talk everything comics, graphic novels, and manga. I am Ashley. If you're new here, welcome to the channel. If you've been here before, thank you for coming back again. So today I'm here to do kind of like a rapid fire recommendation list of 5 graphic novels that you should check out if you enjoy nonfiction. So I have been reading nonfiction now just for a few years. Nonfiction was really tough for me. Like just growing up and even in early adulthood, I was not a huge fan of nonfiction. I found it to be really intimidating and thought that I would be bored out of my mind. But really, honestly, I've kind of found my niche of nonfiction and I have really grown into it. But for those who are still nervous about nonfiction, I always say try some nonfiction like graphic memoirs, graphic novels. Like they're really great to dive into and really give you a scope of certain topics and issues and events in history without it being like so text heavy and feeling extremely overwhelming. So we're going to do this quickly. I have 5 that I want to introduce you to that I think are really fun and ones that I have completely adored and loved myself. So the first one that we have on here is I'm a Wild Seed. This one is really short and it has some really great illustrations in it. I'm a Wild Seed is a short memoir of Sharon Lee de la Cruz, and really it discusses the intersection of being BIPOC and queer, and so it really dives into the whole concept of intersectionality and how intersectionality functions within a patriarchal system and how it is very difficult sometimes in communities when you have those intersections. It was really quick. There was a lot of terminology and explanation of things that I was already actively aware of, but I think that it still was an enjoyable read for me. And this is a good kind of like primer for those who want to understand more about intersectionality without necessarily maybe picking up those bigger books like hood feminism or trap feminism, where we're looking at the intersection of so many different things like race, gender, and sexuality and gender identity. Whereas in this, we're getting those same discussions, but it also is a way for us to read it in a more concise and I guess easy access, more accessible, that's what I was looking for, in a more accessible manner. I really enjoy this. Artwork is great. I could not make this list without including the Complete Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi. This is a book that I have read multiple times. As you can see, I'm due for a reread. I feel like I try to read this book at least once a year. This is a graphic memoir about Marjane during the Iranian Revolution that happened in the late 70s. It explores what happens in Iran during that time period, how it impacted her family. It also looks at her going through puberty and adolescence, just growing up, being sent abroad for her parents to protect her, the different levels of oppression and discrimination she faced while she was living abroad, especially from being from Iran, being a woman of color, and how that impacted her and her schooling. This is a very heavy graphic memoir. I will say this, it's a lot of violence, a lot of things that happen on page that are graphic, but also very true to what Marjane experienced. This author also has another one out that's called Embroideries that I don't know how many people have read that one, but I haven't read that one in years, but it's also another one that's worth checking out. This is another one that I could not make this list without also including They Call This Enemy. This is by George Takei. I love this. This is one of those books that I feel like should be taught in secondary school to highlight the kind of the complexity that exists in the United States, especially when we talk about our leadership, mainly our presidents, and how they were able to do some good things, but also did some decisions or made some decisions that were not so great. So this takes place during World War II. It follows George and his family as they are sent to internment camps after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. It explicitly talks about how they were living prior to their experience in the internment camps and how they pretty much had to start all over from scratch once they were released from the internment camps. And it is a clear example, like George talks about in this is a clear example of what happens when you look at these presidential figures and you put them on a pedestal, you put them on this pillar, and you acknowledge all the good that they did, but you don't talk about the things that they did that were wrong. You had a president who was great when it came to the Great Depression, not for everyone, as I might note. Okay, but for some things did add some programs that were beneficial to people during the Great Depression, but also signed an executive order that sent thousands and thousands of Japanese Americans to internment camps and stripped them of everything that they had. You have to acknowledge the good with the bad, that way history doesn't repeat itself, and George Takei does an excellent job of diving into that and explaining that. This is one of the best nonfiction graphic memoirs that I have ever read. It's a 5-star read for me. I do need to reread this one. I've only read it once, but I do plan to reread it sometime soon. The next one that I have on here is one that I haven't talked about in a while, and it's called I Was There, American Dream. This is another nonfiction. A lot of these are just nonfiction graphic memoirs. This is another nonfiction graphic memoir where we follow our writer as they discuss growing up in a multi-ethnic home. They are part Filipino as well as part Egyptian, and they spent most of their life growing up with their Filipino family and had kind of like a cultural separation from the Egyptian side of their family, which is their father's side of the family. And it discusses what it's like to grow up when you have so many different identities and how those identities cross with each other, especially when we're talking about growing up in a multi-ethnic home, how growing up in a community that was so diverse that asking someone like, where are you from, was not considered offensive, whereas nowadays if you ask someone like, where are you from, no, but where are you from, it's pretty offensive to ask somebody that, where in this situation it was completely normalized. There was some discussion about even having confidence and appreciation and joy and love for your background. It doesn't stop you sometimes from having doubts of trying to have that proximity to whiteness, trying to talk a certain way, dress a certain way, look a certain way, and knowing that that proximity to whiteness is what helps you advance in the world. And I really enjoyed that discussion because I know about proximity to whiteness as it applies to the Black community and things that we do with our hair, how we code switch, but it's always interesting to hear stuff like that from a different perspective, from those who are from different races, ethnicities, and cultures. And the last one that I have on the list is one that Bree and I talked about last year, and it's How to Be Ace. This is a good primer for those who are interested in reading the book Ace by Angela Chen, but want it in a more accessible way. Ace explores our author's attempt to understand their sexuality without having the terms to describe what they were experiencing. So although I think the term ace did exist at the time that they were growing up, it wasn't as widespread, and the spectrum that we see now with asexuality was not really something that was discussed or really heavily in existence at that point. And so they thought that, you know, growing up, oh, eventually I'll be interested in sex like the rest of my friends. I'm just not interested now. But as they got older, they were like, wait, I'm still not interested in sex. So is there something wrong with me? And it really illustrated the importance of having the language and terms to identify yourself. And I know people like, why does everybody have to have a label? Sometimes having that label, having those words are important for people to be able to identify themselves and to feel comfortable with what they're experiencing. All right, y'all, so that is it. Those are my recommendations for those of you who love nonfiction and want to get into some graphic novels that are nonfiction. As always, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more content from me, click the subscribe button. If you're looking for ways to follow me on social media, all the links will be down in the description box below, and I'll be back with another video soon.